All right, so I guess with all the pictures and everything being released, a lot of Epstein news has fallen through the cracks. And Drop Site News did a good story on Jeffrey Epstein and Les Wexner's connections to the kind of Iran Contra affair, which was not just arming the Contras and selling weapons to Iran for hostages. It also involved a lot of cocaine trafficking that led to the crack era, which was documented by Gary Webb. So we're gonna look a little bit at the Drop Site News article, but they really sourced their most of the material from a gentleman by the name of Bob Fitrakis, and we're gonna look at what he said because he's been investigating Les Wexner, Iran Contra, Jeffrey Epstein for almost 20 years now. So let's start looking at the connection between not only Les Wexner and Jeffrey Epstein and Iran Contra, but also the Mafia, going back to the Meyer Lansky days. So here is the Drop Site News article. Basically, they caught something in the New York Times about a gentleman by the name of Stanley Pottinger. And after that, most of the information they got is from Bob Fitrakis. So let's look at what Bob Fitrakis had to say. So we had this main article, which was written about 5 years ago. And Jeffrey Epstein, there's much more to the story. I've taken out the more important pieces that I think that people should know. They said the late state of Ohio Inspector General David Sturtz, one of my sources, was gathering evidence against Les Wexner and Jeffrey Epstein regarding public corruption, bribery, and information related to the murder of Columbus attorney Arthur Shapiro. The ghost of Arthur Shapiro, a prominent local attorney who was slain in 1985 mob-style murder, continues to haunt the city of Columbus. So it's a unsolved murder that Les Wexner was investigated for, and he actually had the head of the police department fired and replaced because he's so powerful in Ohio that if someone investigates him, he can just get them fired. So this is interesting. Sturz referred to Epstein as Wexner's boyfriend. I've heard those rumors too, that Wexner is a homosexual and Jeffrey is bisexual. So makes sense. He was an international man of mystery with ties to the CIA, the royal family, Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, and others. And at the heart of it, he is perhaps our nation's most well-known pedophile. Echoing Greek tragedies, Wexner, with his name on more Central Ohio buildings than anyone, and known for his generous philanthropy, was caught up in Epstein's human trafficking scandal. So Wexner donates a lot of money to Ohio State. In the city he lives in, he donates a lot of stuff. So he's a very powerful man, untouchable, which is one of the reasons he has not been arrested as being one of the major accomplices to Jeffrey Epstein. So Epstein, who is known to have flown President Clinton several times on his jet obtained from the Limited, was usually seen in the company of Ghislaine Maxwell, daughter of deceased publishing tycoon Robert Maxwell. After Maxwell fell off or was pushed off his yacht in 1991, it was revealed that Maxwell was working for the Israeli government and the Mossad, the Israeli intelligence service. While Maxwell's ties to the Mossad are well documented, Epstein's connections are less well known. The London Sunday Times quoted a New York Social Observer describing Epstein as follows: "He's Mr. Enigmatic. Nobody knows whether he's a concert pianist, property developer, a CIA agent, a math teacher, or a member of the Mossad." I think he wasn't a math teacher by then, so they could pull that out. New York Magazine claimed Epstein is the man who moves Wexner's billions around the globe. So this is when we get into Iran Contra right here. As a logistics man for Wexner, Epstein arranged the arrival of Southern Air Transport, SAT, to Rickenbacker Air Force Base in Columbus, Ohio. The airline, formerly Air America, I don't know if anyone's seen the movie Air America with Mel Gibson and Robert Downey Jr., and it's about a bunch of CIA agents selling heroin to help out. I believe it's the Vang Pao, the Laotian resistance who were fighting against the communists. All right. SAT filed for bankruptcy in Columbus on October 1st, 1998, the same day the Central Intelligence Agency Inspector General issued a report linking the cargo hauler to allegations of drug running in connection with U.S.-backed Contra rebels in Nicaragua. So we're going to look at Spook Air, which, again, Bob Fitrakis did a great job investigating this Air Force base, which reminds me of Mena Air Force Base, or the Mena Air Force place where Bill Clinton was implicated in narcotics trafficking, and a good friend of his, Dan Lassiter, was actually convicted for distributing cocaine. And Another person connected to him, Barry Seal, actually ran operations out of there. So it seems like there were several MENA airport bases, and Rickenbacker Air Force Base seems to be another one. So here's what he said in Spook Air. Here's the Spook Air article by Bob Fitrakis, written in 2018. New accounts show that the limited owner, Leslie Wexner, played a role in SAT's relocation to Rickenbacker. Two other key figures in the SAT story have Columbus connections: Alan D. Fears Jr., a starting tackle on the 1961 Ohio State University football team and a Buckeye assistant coach in 1962, who later became the chief of the CIA Central American Task Force, and retired Air Force Major General Richard Secord. So Richard Secord was really caught up in the Iran Contra affair, from arming the Contras to trading weapons to Iran for hostages. He was a very important figure. Those who remember the scandal in the 80s or have studied it as a historical matter. So he was the head of air logistics for the CIA-owned Air America covert actions in Laos between 1966 and 1968. So this was, again, when they started using heroin to fund the Laotian forces, to fund anti-communist forces. So this was back in the 60s that Air America was doing this. And they continued doing it during Iran Contra, but instead of arming the Laotians, they were arming the Contras. An air logistics coordinator and illegal Contra resupply network for Oliver North in the 80s. Both Fears and Secord eventually were found guilty of charges in connection with the Iran Contra affair. That really they were both pardoned. On July 9th, 1991, Fears pleaded guilty to two misdemeanor charges involving illegally supplying weapons to the Contras. According to the recent CIA report on Southern air transport, Fears informed U.S. Senate investigators that the CIA told the DEA early on about Contra leaders being involved in drug smuggling. Secord, who was a 1954 graduate of Columbus South High School, West Wexner, big in Columbus, that's where Ohio State is, pleaded guilty in 1989 to a felony charge in connection with the cover-up of the Iran Contra affair. While SAT was busy setting up offices in Central Ohio, the CIA was linking the airline to illicit activities. The October 1998 CIA report on Southern Air Transport says that as early as January 21st, 1987, the Customs Office in New Orleans was investigating an allegation of drug trafficking by SAT crew members. The 1987 memorandum noted the source of the allegation was a senior FDN Contra official and indicated that the official was concerned that the scandal emanating from Southern Air Transport could rebound badly on FDN Contra interests, including humanitarian aid from the United States. The memo continues. On February 23rd, 1991, a DEA cable to CIA-linked SAT to drug trafficking. So a DEA cable to the CIA linked. So they're telling the CIA, you guys are dealing drugs, and you're okay. So that's what that's about. The cable reported that SAT was of record in DEA's database from January 1985 to September 1990. Those are the prime Iran Contra years right there. In August 1990, entry in DEA's database reportedly alleged that $2 million was delivered to the firm's business sites, and several of the firm's pilots and executives were suspected of smuggling narcotics currency. How did such a notorious company come to set up shop in Central Ohio? Perhaps it was the efforts of Langston to keep the airline's history and intelligence operations at arm's length that assured Ohio officials of SAT success. In March 1995, Langston told the Columbus Dispatch that his company was no longer connected to the CIA. Sure or not. Apparently, the airline was in better shape financially when it engaged in covert and possibly illegal activities. Officials of SAT, which was founded in 1947, acknowledged that the airline was owned by the CIA from 1960 to 1973. Those were, of course, the Vietnam War era years when it was used to transport heroin from Laos to Vietnam and Vietnam back to the United States. The CIA purchased SAT for $300,000 and rapidly expanded the airline's business into Far East and Latin America. So Vietnam and Latin America, heroin and cocaine. At one point, SAT was the CIA's largest proprietary, a private business owned by the CIA with estimated assets of more than 50 million and more than 8,000 employees worldwide. In 1973, the CIA sold SAT to the official who had run it on behalf of the, so they sold it to themselves. With a 5-point loan million from the First National Bank in Chicago, known to be a CIA-used bank. So they sold the bank to themselves with a loan from themselves, according to the National Journal. The airline retained informal ties with both the CIA and the National Security Council, NSC. The current principal owner is Miami attorney James Bastain, a former CIA lawyer who chaired the investment partnership of the management group that acquired the SAT from the CIA. In 1979, Bastain acquired the company's outstanding stock. The airline's activities after that suggested it was still heavily tied to the U.S. national security apparatus. During the 1980s, Southern Air Transport carried a variety of military supplies, arms, and equipment to the Contras. Southern Air President Langston admitted in an affidavit in the civil trial of SAT employee Eugene Hassifus. So I don't know if you guys remember Eugene Hassifus, but his plane was shot down over Nicaragua, and this kind of led to the Iran Contra affair. So his plane was shot down when he was bringing weapons to Nicaragua, and he admitted he was working for the CIA, in particular, two gentlemen by the name of Felix Rodriguez, who's an anti-Castro Cuban, very close to George Bush, and Luis Posada Correas, who was a terrorist who killed 63 people on a Cuban plane with a bomb, numerous acts of terrorism, and he was also like a narco-terrorist. So back when the CIA was cool with Venezuela, he ran the Venezuelan CIA, and he used it to sell a lot of drugs. So we have these narco traffickers who are working in Nicaragua with Air America. That SAT flew TOW anti-tank missiles from Kelly Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas to Israel. So Israel was definitely a part of Iran Contra as well. They were both arming the Contras and they were arming Iran. Southern Air crews then loaded the missiles onto Israeli-owned planes and flew them into Iran. At the time, President Ronald Reagan was officially urging the world to embargo Iran, a country he called Murder, Inc. Interesting. In 1986, SAT secretly shipped 90 tons of TOW missiles to Iran as part of the Reagan administration's secret arms for hostage exchange. Proceeds from the sale of the missiles, some 16 million, were diverted to the Contra resupply effort in Central America. The scandal broke on October 5th, 1986. A Southern Air Transport C-123 cargo plane carrying 10,000 pounds of arms was shot down over Nicaragua. So that was the Eugene Hassifus incident I was talking about earlier. The flight logs of the downed Southern Air Transport C-123 linked it to a history of drug involvement with the CIA, cocaine, and the Medellin drug cartel in Colombia. The logs documented several Southern Air Transport flights to Barranquilla, Colombia during October 1985, the same time Wanda Palacios, a Miami drug informant, told the FBI that the airline was running drugs. It was also the same airplane that Louisiana drug dealer Barry Seal used in a joint CIA-DEA sting operation in 1984 against the Sandinistas. So this is basically when the CIA tried to frame the Sandinistas for transporting cocaine when it was really them. They used a double agent by the name of Robert Vesco, who had fled to Cuba but was still a CIA agent, still working for the CIA, and they used him to corrupt some Nicaraguan and Cuban officials. And then the CIA and Oliver North tried to make it look like it was the Cubans and the Nicaraguans transferring the cocaine when it was really the Contras and the CIA. Seal acquired the plane through a complicated airline swap with the Medellin cartel, according to declassified government documents, and the plane was fitted with hidden cameras by the CIA at Rickenbacker Air Force Base, the same Air Force Base where Jeffrey Epstein was handling logistics. So I'm wondering if you knew Bill Clinton back then because they had the mutual connection with Barry Seal. It looks like Rickenbacker Air Force Base was a parallel drugs and arms trafficking shipment center to Mena Airport Base in Arkansas, where they were doing the same thing. Guns going down to Central America, cocaine coming back up from Central America. Seal reportedly flew weapons for the Contras and returned to the United States with cocaine. He was murdered in New Orleans in 1986 by Colombian hitmen. Reports of SAT involvement with drug runners surfaced early in the Congressional Iran Contra inquiry. In August 1987, the New York Times reported Palacios informed congressional investigators that she witnessed drugs being exchanged for guns intended for the Contras. Palacios identified Southern air transport planes involved in the gun and drug running in two separate incidents in 1983 and in 1985. Initially, SAT denied any connection to the CIA and dismissed accusations of drug running as absurd. Although SAT issued an internal memo denying any post-Iran Contra connections to the CIA during the Gulf War, Southern Air Transport played a key role in logistic support of the U.S. military, and in 1990, the Air Force awarded SAT a $54 million contract for air transport services. Early 1996 opened for SAT with the same storyline when it garnered a 90-day contract to transport construction supplies, equipment, and civilian personnel from Zagreb, Croatia to Tuzla, Bosnia, one of the world's military hotspots. So this was when America was going to war against Serbia to protect the Bosnians. Which is a whole other story, and I'll do a video on that later. So this is what kind of sparked it all. This is an article by Bob Fitrakis way back in 1998. He was writing about Les Wexner and Les Wexner's ties to the Mafia. And for those who studied the CIA and the Mafia, going back to the John F. Kennedy assassination, the Mafia worked very closely with the CIA, not only for helping them conduct assassinations, but also the mob deals drugs and the CIA deals drugs. So when they get the opium from Southeast Asia or the cocaine from Central America, they ship it to America, and then the Mafia distributes it. So let's look at this article about Les Wexner's ties to the Mafia. So he talks about Wexner's business relations with Francis J. Walsh, the owner and chief executive officer of Walsh Trucking Company out of New Jersey, were explored. Alive found that a limited spokesperson told Women's Wear Daily in the July 25th, 1987 issue that Walsh has done an excess of 90% of the Limited's trucking business around the time of Shapiro's murder. The spokesman estimated that the current figure was 30 to 35% of the Limited's business. The Limited Inc. was described as Walsh's single business customer. So there's this corrupt trucker. So if you wanted to deal drugs and you wanted to ship drugs in bras and lingerie heading to Victoria's Secret, you got a partner, Les Wexner. You can get drugs all over the country after they fly in to Rickenbacker Air Force Base. Now you have trucks going all over the country to transport the cocaine. In July 1984, the New York Department of Law Organized Crime Task Force issued a subpoena for Walsh's bank records. National Westminster Bank of New York, in response to the subpoena, notified Frank Walsh Financial Resources Company. The notice was addressed to Frank Walsh Financial Resources at 1 Limited Parkway. So his headquarters were the same headquarters as Les Wexner. Both Youngstown real estate developer Edward J. DeGortolo and Walsh have been identified as associates of the Genovese LaRocca crime family in Pittsburgh, now simply the Pittsburgh family, the police report states. So Edward J. DeGortolo was a close associate of Meyer Lansky. He was Italian, but he was a close associate of Jewish gangster Meyer Lansky. And he wound up actually owning the San Francisco 49ers for a while. Then he was convicted of corruption for trying to bribe an official in Louisiana to get a casino. And he was pardoned by none other than Donald J. Trump, Jeffrey Epstein's buddy, in 2020. In 1988, the Philadelphia Inquirer reported that Walsh was charged with making illegal payoffs to reported mob figures and officials of Teamster Local 560. Again, going back to Jimmy Hoffa, connections between the Mafia and the Teamsters, which had been under judicial control in an effort to rid it from mob influence. The May 16th, 1988 indictment drew media interest when it was named as unindicted co-conspirators convicted Genovese crime family boss Anthony Fat Tony Salerno. So Anthony Fat Tony Salerno is actually an old connection of Donald Trump, and his lawyer was Roy Cohn, who was one of Donald Trump's mentors. So it's all the pieces are coming together. Alleged crime family captain Matthew Matty the Horse, Ian Aiello, three former officials of Local 560, the Provenzano brothers, Anthony Nunzio and Salvatore. The Provenzanos, alleged mobsters, have been convicted of various charges in the past and linked in media accounts to the murder of former Teamster president Jimmy Hoffa. So the connections between mafia, intelligence, unions, Jeffrey Epstein, Les Wexner, it's all deep. We concluded from the predicate facts presented, it appears that Les Wexner had established contact with associates reputed to be organized crime figures, one of whom was a major investment partner and another who was using the limited headquarters as a mailing address. It is not known whether there are other such figures among Wexner's associates, but it can be hypothesized that the Genovese LaRocca crime families might consider Wexner friend. Lee have speculated. So, there's a lot to take in. We have the Mafia, we have Iran Contra, we have the CIA all together, and Israel and the Mossad. So, Iran Contra, a lot of people involved in Iran Contra. The Mossad was involved in Iran Contra. There was a gentleman by the name of Mike Harari who was a co-conspirator in cocaine trafficking, according to a number of whistleblowers like Gene Chip Tatum, Terry Reid. A number of people have said that the Mossad was involved in Iran Contra cocaine trafficking, and the Mafia too. John Gotti and the Gambino crime family was also involved in Iran Contra cocaine trafficking. Because once you move the cocaine in, then you need the local crime figures to move it. So on the West Coast, it might have been the black gangsters like Freeway Ricky Ross. On the East Coast, it might have been Alpo or whoever, but also, white people do cocaine too, and they necessarily weren't smoking crack. So you have the Mafia who is selling cocaine, helping out their old buddies in the CIA, just like they did when they were selling the CIA's heroin in the 40s and 50s and 60s. So that's it. Iran Contra, Jeffrey Epstein. Don't get distracted by all the pictures. It's deeper. It's deeper than the pictures. It's deeper than Michael Jackson. Deeper than Bill Clinton. Peace. Subscribe to Reality Theory.